Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of our second season of the podcast. As you may have heard in our last episode, I'll be a host from now on alongside Motobug and Flarp. This week, myself and Motobug will be your hosts, featuring our special guests, Reslived and David V. Kimball. So,
howdy.
Yeah. So to give you a bit of background on them, Reslived is a long-standing community member and active player from MDVA, one of the heads of the PMBR. That may not be true, but he can correct me on that. And one of the more prominent commentators in PM, and he's put out his own content as well, including best player of each character and scene overviews like the one he did for Japan. And then David is the founder of Smash Bros. Legacy, a group of content creators and modders who focus on building the most insane and fun mod pack they can for PM 3.6. And they also focus on posting tutorials regarding modding and expanding the scene's overall knowledge and appreciation of the subject. So our topics for today are going to be, we're going to talk about the stage list that dropped and just kind of modding PM, Legacy, and kind of just the whole theology surrounding that. So to start off, anything you guys want to say about yourselves that I might have missed or might have said wrong?
I think I'm good. I think you just about covered it.
You're good? All right. How about you, David?
I think you did a great job explaining what we do.
All right, awesome. So before we get into it, Reza, would you mind giving us a brief summary of what the PMBR is?
Yeah. So the PMBR is short for the Project M Back Room. Not to be confused with the former Project M development team, who were known as PMDT, and at one point went by the name PMBR. The reason they went by the name PMBR is because every Smash community has what's known as a back room. There's the Smash 64 back room, there's the Melee back room, there's the Brawl back room, and then there's the Smash 4 back room. And these back rooms are typically comprised of players and organizers and community leaders from all around the world, and they come together to try and work out ways to provide content and ideas that help further the competitive community. The most common things that backrooms are known for are tier lists. So there's a Melee backroom tier list, there's a Smash 4 backroom tier list, and they've actually done a lot of them recently for Smash 4. And of course, the PMBR has put out a few tier lists over the last few years, ever since 3.6 became the final version. The other thing the PMBR does that we're really well known for is the PM Rank project. That's once a year we rank the top 50 PM players around the world, and we put out some articles about each player. I think that about covers what backrooms are mostly known for. Recently, we started... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, that's like a lot of it.
Yeah. So recently, what the PMBR is known for right now is we have been working on what we're calling the PMBR recommended rule set. And what this is something that we can try and help unite all of the competitive communities around the world to follow a single set of loose guidelines. And one of the things we offered in this recommended rule set is a stage list that will be debuting at Smash and Splash 4, which is coming up soon, and is very likely going to be run at Low Tier City later this year. And part of the debate around this stage list is the fact that we have very slightly modified a few pre-existing stages from Vanilla 3.6 to better suit a competitive environment.
Right. Now, David, I know I touched on the goal of Legacy a bit in your introduction, but could you give us a little more insight as to what the Legacy team exactly is and what they strive to be?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I'd like to come out and say is that there's two main projects with the Legacy team, and there's Legacy TE and there's Legacy XP. And I know there's some brand confusion, and for any brand confusion, you can thank me for confusing people.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome. A very long time ago, I had personal builds called Smash Brothers Legacy, which is something else, so if you're confused, that makes sense, and I have some work to do. But basically, Legacy XP is a for fun build. It has Project M as a base, kind of, but it takes some liberties in terms of adding new characters and just a ton of stages, and doesn't really care or concern itself with the competitive scene. Now, Legacy TE, on the other hand, is fundamentally different in nature because it claims, and it's a very bold claim, that it can be a substitute for vanilla PM 3.6. And by the way, that is not a claim that we take lightly. We very carefully test all the stages, and we make sure that, if you played on the vanilla stage, the outcome is precisely the same as if you played our start alt, for example, and we do that with our costumes also. And then we also bug test and all that. So TE and XP are both, you could say, mods of Project M, but they are very, very different beasts. So I just want to make that really clear. And then overall, I just personally have a huge passion for like working on Project M builds, because the PMDT obviously did such a great job with it and actually encouraged like me to look more into brawl modding and like figure it out. And so my passion really is like custom Project M mods, because when you go to a scene or whatever, you always see like their custom build with like their colors on it, or a custom Pokemon Stadium 2 stage. And I just thought that was cool, because every scene gets to kind of like have their own voice and have their own like flavor basically to their build. So I just want to empower more players to be able to easily mod their build, so there isn't this barrier in the way.
Right. So David, could you just fill us in a bit on what TE's brought to the table in the latest update?
Yeah, definitely. So as of, I don't know, a few weeks ago, we released Legacy TE 2.0, and with that big number change was a whole host of things. I would say most prominently the code menu, which Fracture worked on. And the code menu, essentially, if I could summarize it, think of like 20XX TE or 20XX for PM, in the sense that it's this menu you can turn on, and you can enable a bunch of debug mode features from there. You can enable something called DI draw, which shows you like DI lines and trajectory
Fantastic
lines
feature.
and stuff. Dude, I'm glad you're a fan. I have to be honest, when Fracture like worked on that, and he's like, oh, by the way, here's a thing I made. It came out of nowhere, and all of us were like freaking out. It was really awesome. And then he also like would add more things. Like he came up with the endless friendlies, and we talked as a team, and we thought what features would benefit like PM the most from a competitive perspective. And so we came up with, well, endless friendlies would be great. Another thing is like some training tools like DI draw and infinite shield and stuff that like could really benefit the community. But also we thought, we're making this new thing. We don't want to like really have it get in the way of tournaments, because I know one issue too was like people would accidentally enable debug mode, but there wasn't some obvious sign that you had done it, and so it would like mess with the game, or people would get confused and stuff. And so not only did we make the option to revert to PM debug mode in game, we can actually turn the code menu off completely in game and debug mode completely off in game, so no more accidental like activations of it or whatever. And I know that was possible in like the press start and hold start and all that, but this is just a little bit easier, I think. So anyway, that's just one of the features. And the other thing is just to go over them really quickly, or just any like quality of life feature you can think of. There's the random DI by CPU. There's the working replays. There's of course the memory leak fixes, and a bunch of new content, like a bunch of new costumes and a bunch of new start alt stages that are all basically 1-for-1 reskins of the base stage. So in other words, think of like Battlefield, but now it has a like Fire Emblem theme. So it goes on the Castle Siege slot. So that basically the idea is you get visual variety with the same fundamental stage.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've been following it pretty closely since 2.0 announced. I'm definitely excited for it. But speaking of changes, Reslived, could you outline the big ones that this stage list brings? I know you mentioned blast zones changing, and I know there's a new stage, so maybe talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So the big thing we wanted to do with the recommended rule set is, first of all, come up with a 10 stage list. 10 stages makes the 2-band system make a lot more sense for counterpicking. We don't have to rely on Geo Stupid Rule, or GSR as it's called in the PM community. And so that's why we ended up adding a version of Metal Cavern. There was actually a lot of discussion about adding a 10th stage and what that 10th stage should be. And we decided we wanted something of the archetype of Yoshi's Island Brawl. But we actually had a lot of discussion about kind of ruining what made Yoshi's Island Brawl unique. Because if we ended up trying to suggest a version of Yoshi's Island Brawl that didn't have platform tilt, that didn't have fly guys, that didn't have the ghost, it seemed a little weird. Oh, and also didn't have the walls. It seemed a little weird. So we ended up going with a version of Metal Cavern that Lunchables had actually brought forward that still kind of kept the same idea of Yoshi's Island Brawl. We tried to match the stage dimensions as closely as possible. The platform across the middle is about the same size. The sides are not walls that go all the way into the blast zone. Instead, they're very small walls that you can wall jump off and ride off of. So that's the really big change that I think a lot of people notice immediately is the addition of this version of Metal Cavern. The other things we changed are pretty slight. Most notably, Dreamland and Wario Land, very slight changes to their blast zones.
And Delfino's,
Wario
right?
Land historically, I'm sorry?
And Delfino's secret as well? Or?
Yeah, I was gonna get to that as well. Because we did change the blast zones for Delfino's secret, but we also changed the platform cycle.
Right.
But I wanted to talk about Wario Land and Dreamland real quick, is because these stages have blast zones that very notoriously affect competitive matches and very notoriously affect game balance. I think a lot of people out there are aware that, you know, kind of getting Ganondorf or Bowser or Charizard on a stage like Wario Land is kind of nuts because they themselves cover half the stage and they hit so hard that you die at 50, and no one really liked that aspect of it, and it caused the stage to be an insta-ban in a lot of matchups. And then on the other end of the spectrum was Dreamland, where characters that were supposed to have kill moves, like, you know, Fox up smash or like Ness back throw, you actually would just live until 170 because the blast zones were just nuts. So this way we kind of we expanded Wario Land a little bit, brought Dreamland down a little bit to kind of make the stages feel a little bit more competitive. And then the last change we made, so that's Metal Cavern, Wario Land, and Dreamland. And then the last change we made was to Delfino's Secret, as you already mentioned. That also had a small change to the blast zones. We had noticed that the set of neutral stages was actually skewed pretty hard towards large stages because Pokemon Stadium 2 is a very large stage as far as stage ground, and then there was also Delfino's. So you would end up in these situations where you were kind of forced to play on a big stage, even if you didn't want to, as your first game. And then the one thing we also changed about Delfino's Secret is the platform cycle. The platform cycle in Vanilla 3.6 is pretty insane. It's 7 minutes long, given that a typical match is 8 minutes. You don't always see the later, crazier parts of the platform cycle, but it can get a little nuts, almost reminiscent of like 3O Dracula's Castle, where it's just like platforms stacked on top of each other and slanted in really weird ways and not really being helpful. So we used a version of Delfino's that kept two of the platforms static on either side of the stage, and then there's a center platform that rises up above those platforms or sinks back into the ground as if it's rotating between a version of Battlefield and a version of PS2. So that gave the neutral stage list a more platform-oriented stage, which wasn't something that was really featured there outside of Battlefield, but also kept the blast zones in line with what we felt was competitively acceptable. So those are the 4 stages we really changed.
Right. Yeah. So they're decent changes. Like, they're gonna affect some things, obviously. But let's kind of talk about the reception for these things. So we'll let you keep talking about the reception for the stage list. What's that been like since you guys kind of announced it?
Sure. So I'll talk about specifically my interpretation of the reception and what's been going on. So the way this was revealed to the public was I had asked the Smash and Splash tournament team if they would run this stage list. The entire rule set and the entire build that PMBR was going to recommend was not fully complete, but we said, hey, we have a version of the build with this stage list, and I think Smash and Splash is the place to debut it. They said, sure, we'll go ahead and try it out. And the original reception was not, I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag, as things are when you try and recommend changes to rule sets. There was no predefined rule set for Smash and Splash. They hadn't announced any specific rules. Back at Smash and Splash 2, they ran Bowser's Castle. I think Smash and Splash 3 ran with Paragon rule set. So they're known for trying different rule sets. And people attending the tournament thought, okay, that looks cool. I'll try these stages out. But there were some regions that were against the idea of changing stages at all. And so these people were saying, okay, while Smash and Splash may be running the stage list, I don't want my region in particular to run this stage list, so we won't be running it at locals. And we're still trying to reach out to those people, still trying to convince them, hey, you know, we just want people to try out the stages. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you feel like this makes the game more competitive, more competitively viable versus some of the stages that have really caused a lot of pain to competitive players over the last year and a half. So, you know, there's still a lot of discussion to be had and people to talk to, but overall reception, definitely a mixed bag.
Great. Yeah, I've definitely seen it myself. I've been on multiple social media platforms seeing some bigger names talking about it, some randoms I've never seen before. Definitely some discussion going still, and we're kind of going to continue.
A lot of
Yeah,
discussion.
I don't want to discredit the opinions of what you might call randoms, right?
Oh no, for sure. It's just
these are people that, you know, potentially attend tournaments, potentially play on net play, and these are people who want to contribute to the competitive community, and you know, hearing the voices of people who say, "Hey, I really don't like the way the community is moving forward." You know, that's valid insight, but it's also good to hear the other side of the spectrum where it's, you know, hey, the game's kind of stagnating. We'd like to see changes in the rule set, etc. So, I mean, again, it goes both ways.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a bit more about that. But while we're still talking about reception, I'm going to flip it to David. What's life been like since you guys dropped 2.0 for both XP and TE pretty much same day, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to my issue of brand confusion, there were definitely some posts about TE that says, why doesn't, you know, I can't get Gino to work. And I was like, well, I think you got the wrong build there, buddy. But yeah, so that's been fun. Other than that, minor complaint. Overall, like, the reactions to Legacy XP and Legacy TE have been phenomenal and exactly what we wanted. Like, it was honestly, it could not have been more perfect. And to be honest with you, TE was pretty much ready to go like a week or so before it went out, but we were kind of waiting on XP. And so I was able to kind of go in and like help them out and like kind of push them forward a little bit because I'm not as involved in XP. I am more of a TE guy. So anyway, so after they launched, it's like the XP trailer just exploded as like we knew it would because of all like the waiting and all the hype and just all the stuff surrounding it. And then TE rather did a really good job too and made a huge splash. And I think one of my highlights was seeing the trailer play at Press More Buttons and then seeing, you know, the commentators freak out about it and say like you know, they were geeking out about it. They were saying like, oh man, like I knew we were going to play this, but we hadn't actually seen it yet. I'm so excited for DI draw and all this stuff. That was just really fun to see. And then hearing all the cheers and stuff as the video was being played. Because just to remind everyone, that was not how TE 1.0 was received at all. Because TE 1.0, the reveal for it debuted at Olympus before the top 8. And around that time, people were like getting hyped because of the Lunchabuild rumors and stuff. So they were really like, they had their expectations set and their appetite was towards a Lunchabuild. And so when TE came out and it was all about, yeah, we're not changing 3.6, but it's a bunch of stuff that's great. People were like, okay, like that's like, it felt like it was a killjoy, you know? And so we were kind of disappointed with that. So this release for TE 2.0 was like just the opposite of that. Everyone was talking about how much they're looking forward to it. People were really impressed with it. And I don't know, we got some crazy number of downloads the first day. The thing about Legacy releases is we notoriously break Dropbox, so all my public Dropbox links always stop working after a release. Yeah, and like the Google Drive one goes down, and like we always end up relying on like MediaFire and what is it, Mega. So it's always fun to like continually break websites, and Brawl Vault like always crashes. Sorry, Brawl Vault admins.
Yeah, Brawl Vault's been having a week, that's for sure.
Yeah, it has. And so anyway, so I would say to answer your question, overall extremely positive. There was almost no negative responses at all from what I could see. It was all very, very positive.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely seen it myself. It's good to know that you went from the 1.0 kind of input to the input you're getting now from the scene. So good to see everyone's hard work pay off in the Legacy team. But speaking of hard work, we're gonna start getting Reslived to do some hard work here as we kind of flesh out more about this whole stage list. So what I want to know now is how did this come up? What led to the stage list? What just kind of like, how did this stage list come to fruition? What was the main goal? Kind of who brought it up? Like where did this come from? How did we get here?
So what is the question about? Why did we decide to have a discussion about the stage list, or is the question about the discussion that we had and how it ended up at the final stage list?
Kind of both. Like, gonna start with like, why did you decide to like talk about like what brought up the stage list in general, and then what made you guys kind of decide, okay, we're gonna like take action and maybe, well, not maybe, definitely come up with a recommended stage list that fixes a bunch of what we think are the main maybe problems with the current stage list? Kind of just like the whole process of like going from
Sure.
no new stage list to a new stage list.
So I do want to clarify that this project wasn't a new stage list, right? It was a recommended rule set, and that's an important distinction to make,
Right.
because it wasn't just stages we discussed. We discussed everything. And that was part of the point, and that's part of the more obvious discussion that's happening around why we want or even need something like this, and that's the fact that there are tournaments all over the world that run completely different rule sets all the
Australia.
time, right? I think people have this misconceived notion that everyone runs Paragon, but that's not even true at a major level. Which is which the last time it was true is when it was required to be true for the 2017 circuit, right? And now majors don't run Paragon anymore. For some examples, Don't Sleep ran not Paragon. BAM 10 ran not Paragon.
I mean, that's
Flex
Australia.
Zone,
They've been doing their own thing for some time.
It's true, but if we're going to talk about regions having dissenting opinions to Paragon, right?
Yeah.
There are regions out there that do that, and it's not like Australia hasn't traveled to the US to compete.
For sure.
Yeah. So there and you can argue this fact that there are these smaller regions that run their own tiny tournaments with different stage lists, but then doesn't that imply there's an inherent problem competitively with the stage list?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And then the final example I was going to give was Flex Zone. Big major, ran earlier this year, did run Paragon stageless, but ran stage first counterpicking for the entire tournament.
That's another big thing. So I believe that was also touched on in the recommended rule set, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And our official documentation and everything hasn't fully been fleshed out or released. But that one of the things we ended up deciding on was character first. And I think there are people out there who tried out some of the other options that we were discussing at the time, right? We tried stage first. We had an idea called No Double Advantage, also known as NDA, that was about your character locked if you're counterpicked to a counterpick stage or something like that. It's been so long now, I don't remember. There was all sorts of different things we tested and debated, and that process carried over into what became the stage list process, right?
Right.
So now after finishing this discussion of why we decided to work on a new stage list, now I'll switch gears into what the stage list discussion was and how it went forward. So in the PMBR, we talked to everyone who was interested in contributing to the rule set discussion, and asked them what they had to offer, and made sure that, okay, if you participate, you're not necessarily going to get everything you want, right? Everyone's got their own opinions about what should be in a rule set, but at the end of the day, if we're unified and we can all try out this rule set, maybe we can come to this nice middle ground that everyone's willing to compete on. So we did that, and we discussed just about everything that can be discussed when it comes to a rule set, and on every single issue, we took a vote. And so there were 20 people who were involved in all of the discussions we had in the PMBR about rule sets. And we never went forward on a decision until we had a simple majority on anything. So that's 11 people had to vote for something in order for it to become what we would recommend. To give you an example, like the character first, stage first discussion, we had that discussion. I think had a 20-person vote early on where stage first only got 3 votes, and all of the other ones had more. So from there, we had to decide, okay, what do we want to test? How do we want to test it? What locals are we going to run it at? We tried it out. Then we had another vote, narrowed it down to 2 more options. And then finally, we still settled on character first, which is why we eventually ended up suggesting it in our rule set.
Which is a good decision, in my opinion.
I'm sorry?
So that's a good decision, in my opinion. But
yeah, I agree with that.
Well, that's good. And honestly, this is one of those things where if you're in your bubble, you can end up being tone deaf. And that's something the PMBR wanted to overcome, right? If you're someone who lives in New York, where a lot of the top players are very pro stage first, then you're going to think, okay, we should be running more stage first tournaments. And that's what happened at Flex Zone.
Right.
If you're someone who lives in MDVA, and everyone in MDVA hates Delfinos, and for a little while we had rule sets that just excluded Delfinos from our stage list, you're going to think that Delfinos is not necessarily a great stage.
Right.
So that was why the PMBR was organized in the way it was, in that we kind of reached out to a lot of different regions and tried to get representatives from as many of them as possible, so that they could kind of bring to light what was going on in their region and why they did things the way they did, so that we could end up voting and come to a consensus of, okay, the actual majority opinion is X. The actual majority opinion is we should probably do character first, right? Things like that.
Right. Now, obviously I'm not going to get into like, oh, well, some scenes don't feel like they were represented in that vote, blah, blah, blah. But like, to summarize, basically the goal of this whole thing was we want to unify all the scenes. We want to give them an agreeable rule set, and basically we want to be able to use that rule set to find out what exactly is the problem right now. Why do we have so many fragmented rule sets throughout not only just like the States, but Canada, Australia, Europe, whatever, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And it's also very difficult to get every opinion.
Yes.
Right. So at some point you have to draw a hard line. We're not going to get the TO opinion and the competitor opinion and the casual opinion from every single region.
And the viewer, so, there's a lot to touch on in those kind of situations.
And then you can get into the discussion of which opinions may or may not matter more when trying to create a rule set for competitive viability. So that was kind of what we were running into when we were creating the panel, but we tried to keep it small. We kept it at a hard limit of 20, and those people all participated. Like I said, we had votes on every issue, and we couldn't move forward until a simple majority was met. So there were votes that I had to, remind people, hey, 19 people have voted, but right now it's 10-9, and I need your vote. So it wasn't like we went through this without due process. We made sure we got as many opinions as we could.
Now, you just mentioned like the 10-9 thing. Did any final decision stay that close until the bitter end? Was there anything just kind of like people could not really let go of? You kind of had to sway one person, and then that would be it.
We never had a 10-10. We did have some very close votes. One that actually jumps out to me right now, very long after the decision was made that we were going to modify stages and adjust them, I think we had an 11-9 decision on whether or not to figure out if we could disable Wispy on Dreamland. Right? Because
that's surprisingly close,
right?
Yeah, and I would think.
And there was a lot of debate because a lot of people were saying, "Hey, Wispy does nothing but hinder competitive play," versus people who say, like,
it's the charm of the stage, kind of.
It's a bit of the charm. It's a bit of the It's a bit of how the stage always ran. It's a bit of there's a lot of arguments both ways, and I mean a large debate was had. But at the end of the day, we all made a pledge to say, hey, we're going to vote on things, and if you lose, you suck it up, because we're trying to do this for the community and to make the community better.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to do it. Sometimes you just have to go forward with the hard decisions. I mean, the whole PMBR is kind of built around we have to make some tough decisions because we want to see the scene grow, and that's kind of what this is the fruit of, right? You guys want to see maybe and hopefully the scene kind of come under one umbrella with this stage list and then move forward from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the goal with everything we do, and also everything we do will always have some amount of blowback, right? I think Blako took the heat from the last tier list pretty hard.
Oh yeah,
PM rank still gets blasted all the time. So you're never gonna please everyone. But if you look around and you say, hey, I wonder what a Project M tier list is, you find the PMBR's tier list, and I think most people in the community look at that and go, you know what, that's about right. I'll stick to it. And that gives our community some visibility, and I think that's really important, especially with the status of our community as our growth kind of continues to stagnate.
Now, I had a few questions already, but you've pretty much answered all of them. I only have one left, and it's definitely something stupid. Like I know the answer already.
Oh, I love stupid questions.
Enough people have been asking. Team Dogfight. New characters or balancing? Is that ever going to happen?
So yeah, so that was one of the things we voted on, and I'll actually name drop real quick. As discussion moved more in the way of mods, myself and Saber actually stepped in and said, we need to vote on what we're modding now. we need a hard line.
Decision. It's a good idea.
To know what's okay and what isn't, because if things get out of hand, it can get out of hand quickly. So we made an official decision as the PMBR. We had a vote to say, what mods are allowed. Are we sticking with stage mods? Are aesthetic mods okay? Are we going to do balance mods? Are we actually going to try and change characters in the future? And so that vote went in the favor of aesthetic and stage mods only. No character mods, no balance mods. We want to stay very far away from
that. And I think most people can agree that's a good conclusion to come to. I mean, obviously the PMBR themselves did, because you guys voted on everything like you said. So now I've had you talking for a while, so we're going to just kind of open this up a bit more so we can just kind of get everyone's opinions out. Moto and David have been kind of sitting quiet while I did basically interrogate you. So I'm going to ask this to David. David, do you feel that the PMBR took a huge risk with the announcement of this kind of recommended rule set? Like, does it maybe bear some risk for the community at large?
Well, all right. First off, I thought we were here to debate whether or not Charizard should be banned. Am I on the wrong episode?
I mean, that's every episode.
Yeah, that's next week.
I feel really bad because I wanted to vote on that in the PMBR, and I don't think we did.
That really should have happened. Oh man.
Okay. Well. All right. Well. Okay. So we are talking about the stage.
Mostly,
changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the big ones. That's the most controversial part. I mean, New York's gonna continue to argue that stage first is better, but it's mostly the stages.
Got it. Okay. Well, first off, before I get into the risks and stuff that were kind of outlined by, and I'm saying Reslived correctly, right? Okay. First off, I want to say that I do appreciate the fact that you and Saber really did your due diligence in terms of I know there are probably a million changes to this game that we want to make, or each person has their own idea of what should be made. Let's define what our parameters are and then work from there. I have to say, and I didn't know about that, so this is the first time I've heard about it. So I really appreciate that you did that. That's a huge deal to me. And then also, you mentioned that you went with the majority and then you told everyone else to suck it up. Assuming the 20 people were the right 20 people, which I'm not saying they were or they're not. I'm just saying I respect that, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you and Saber have come out on Reddit to say that you initially were not even in favor of the stage mods, but based on everyone else in the scene, you went along with it.
Yeah, that's correct. And I try and even in the podcast here, I'm here to defend the decisions of the PMBR as a whole, because I really believe in that process.
Okay, cool. So I just want to make that really clear, and I want to call that out. And since I did that and steamrolled you, Tempest, can you remind me what your question was?
I mean, no, it's fine. It's good to just have those little discussions as well. But the question was, did you feel that announcing this rule set came at any risk to the community at large? Do you think it was a good decision to do that?
Yeah.
Or maybe maybe the negatives outweigh the positives? Just how do you see it from your point of view?
So basically, as Reslived mentioned earlier, I don't think anybody is a fan of how this rule set and how these sets of recommendations, how they manifested themselves, right. How it happened, basically. No one's a fan of it. I think PMBR would agree, there was a specific way in which they wanted to unveil it. They wanted to wait till everything was kind of finished and polished. But, so I'm not going to try to hold that against them at all. I think I'm going to assume that they had a very clear idea of how they were going to present it. That would have been better than what happened. So assuming that, I think obviously, yeah, it's risky to make proposed changes. And I'm even going to say that I think I totally trust that the PMBR did their due diligence in terms of research, what the problematic stages were, how they could be adjusted. I think they did the due diligence in terms of, getting the right feedback, doing the right testing and all that. But I think my main point, and I'm probably going to be repeating this a lot, is I think it's not a matter of are the changes good or bad, but should the changes happen in the first place? That's really the main question I go about. And so my thesis is sort of changes to the game that would cause fundamental core gameplay changes are things that probably we shouldn't do. And then ones that, change things aesthetically or add quality of life features are okay. And so, I think it is pretty bold to make a gameplay change specific recommendation. I think that's in its own category. And so from that perspective, I do think that's very problematic. And I want to apply nuance here. I want two things to be true at once. I want to acknowledge that the PMBR are leaders in the community and that they know what they're doing and that, they have the best interest of the community in mind, but then also say at the same time, I don't think making gameplay changes of any kind or recommending gameplay changes of any kind is acceptable or permissible.
Right.
Yeah, and you address that whole aesthetic versus gameplay change thing in your blog post on the Legacy blog, the 6
exactly.
pillars.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that it's not something that I thought of the day that the PMBR announced the suggestions and the rule set recommendations. It's something that as from TE's conception I've been thinking about, because obviously when you make a build that's supposed to work in place of 3.6, you better have your ducks in a row about what changes are okay and what ones aren't. And so we've given it tons and tons of thought, and we basically came up with 6 different categories of changes you can make. I probably should have this up so I don't say this wrong. But basically, it amounted to. I'm just
that's fine. Yeah, I also have it here so I can follow along.
Oh, cool. So I just got to it. Okay, so basically, the first one is aesthetic changes, and this one's probably the most common in your region build, where you have a custom PS2
PR skins,
you have a PR skin or something like that. What's funny about these changes is that they are a little subjective in the sense that I know one of Dr. Mario's costumes was altered from the melee style because I think he had someone can correct me on this, but I think he had dark gloves or something, and that blended too much in the background or something. So the PMDT made some liberties and changed it up. So really subjective things like that can play a role, but overall aesthetic changes are pretty much okay. Net new inclusions are things like, Kirby used to have 8 costumes, but he now has a 9th and a 10th costume. And as long as everything works and there's no bugs, and it's been thoroughly tested, there should be no problems there. Things like stage alts, right? And then quality of life features like the new code menu that came out, customizing your controls from the character selection screen. That's the third definition. The fourth one is crash fixes. So think
Sonic.
DS22's memory leak fixes.
Sonic.
Which pretty much everyone has been using. Yeah, exactly. Sonic was one of the culprits. And then actually, not a lot of people know about this, and this doesn't really matter to the competitive scene very much. But in VPM, if you pick Cart Rob in clear mode, the game will crash because Cart Rob has an extra bone that emits the smoke or whatever. And so anyway, all these things are fine. I don't think anyone's going to be really concerned that you added another clear mode Rob file to the game, right?
How dare you use fixes?
Yeah, exactly, right? And then so the fifth one is, and this one was a newer one that I'm struggling with, to be honest with you, and I'm still not 100% decided on this, but they are hardware viability balance changes. So think UCF, right? So they don't change the game, they don't change gameplay, but they level out any hardware variables that could occur. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit of walking the line between gameplay and not gameplay changes. So I haven't completely formulated my opinion on those yet. And then the very last definition is gameplay changing modifications, which is pretty broad, but basically this is the way that I thought of it when I was thinking about how I'd explain this. So is everyone familiar with Fracture's replays?
Yes.
Okay, so basically Fracture's replays, for listeners that don't know, Fracture is a dude, and he's really awesome, and he plays PM, and he also mods it. And he basically made the Brawl replay function work for Project M, because in the past, replays wouldn't pick up on light shields and things of that nature. So anyway, you can use Fracture replays to prove validity of true tourney content. And the way that you do that is you play a match. Let's say you came up with a Green Hill Zone alt that you want to be tourney viable. Well, play a match on Green Hill Zone with 2 characters and save that match. And then replace that stage with the stage you want in the files. And then play that replay back, and it will actually play that new stage in the replay. And if the outcome is exactly the same and everything plays the same, then you know it's perfectly tournament legal because it doesn't affect gameplay at all. So that's a good way to it's a good way to actually literally physically test if your content is tournament viable or not. And I think that's a very hard definition that's not subjective in the least. So things like, if you move a collision, Mario's going to drop a little more below than he did before, and it's going to desync, and the game's going to not have the same outcome. Or if you increase the blast zones, Mario's going to die off the screen on the left way earlier than he should have, and that would change the outcome of the game, or things like that. And then obviously I could go into like how that manifests itself in characters, like if you change bones on a character or whatever. But because, Reslived's already pointed out that that's not really an issue, like we're not really talking about ever changing characters, I'm not going to go into that, but you should basically get the basic concept. Does that make sense, what I said?
Yeah. Basically prove that, like, hey, this is just aesthetics, not any gameplay changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So can I
Oh, yeah,
give
for
my
sure.
response to that?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the first thing you said is you're not worried about if the changes are objectively good or objectively bad. The changes being what the PMBR is recommending. You're more worried about if changes should happen, right? And so the point I think the PMBR is trying to make is that for the sake of competitive play and for the sake of the competitive community, changes need to happen to the stages in order to make competitive play more exciting, more reasonable, more balanced for everyone involved, right? So that's why we arrived at the conclusion to make these changes in the first place. We didn't decide, hey, we're just going to make changes willy-nilly. We made these specific changes to try and help the competitive community move forward and continue to advance. And that's the question we always get is, hey, should changes happen? And we say yes, and we're not really sure why the answer is no. It's people saying, all right, but I'm sure you'll speak to that in a minute. But I also wanted to tackle your 6 types of changes and how you speak to specifically, aesthetic changes and these hardware viability changes may or may not be gameplay modifying, but your definition of affecting fundamental core gameplay, right? So this idea that a button press and the interaction in Fracture's replay will be the same in vanilla PM and with whatever change you make on your mod. And to that, I just simply don't agree with this idea that aesthetic changes don't necessarily affect gameplay because of the fact that we are, at least from a competitive standpoint, we are people who are interpreting what's going on the screen. And to that point, I'd like to, I'm sure everyone's heard of this situation where someone sits down at a tournament to play on a setup and a stage comes up with a skin and someone says, no, I'm not going to play on that skin, or no, I'm not going to play on this setup because the skins are
I can't see Snake's grenade or whatever.
Right. So making this, and David, you also brought this up yourself that in PMDT before tried to do that Dr. Mario costume with the gloves, but the gloves were too dark. And that's why they ended up changing his gloves. So this argument that aesthetic changes don't have impact on what's going on in a game is completely unreasonable to me, right? Because, and we've even talked about it in the PMBR of saying, hey, if we're having all this discussion about what is a gameplay change and what isn't, maybe we should just say people are allowed to gentlemen's to vanilla PM whenever they want, right?
Right.
That can be a big issue.
Right, definitely. So I hear what you're saying. I think, but there's 2 things. One, I definitely address that gray area aspect of the aesthetic changes. But from a literal numbers perspective, let's be clear here, it does not change gameplay from a purely numbers
I
perspective.
Agree with that.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand there is a difference between like players' perceptions. That's why it's like we're really careful too when we make 1-for-1s of stages and stuff, because there is such a thing as misleading design.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's plenty of examples of that. For example, if we had a version of Delfino's Secret, for example, where you could see, or no, it wasn't Delfino's. It was Fountain of Dreams, where you could see the platform below the stage and it moving before it was visible. And that technically, because of player perception and because of all that you could argue that messes with gameplay, although it doesn't technically change it from a pure numbers perspective. So I just want to be really clear that we're talking about those 2 separate things. So I think you're kind of mixing them up a little bit. But
I wanted to distinguish that there is such a thing as an aesthetic change that affects gameplay,
yes.
right?
And maybe not affect gameplay from a numbers perspective, just from a perception perspective.
And then the other thing I did want to talk about is in your net new inclusions. I'm looking at it right here, and I don't know if I should read it straight to the people at home, but a specific point it mentions right here is to never replace key tournament content or result in any kind of gameplay change. And the point I wanted to make about that is the idea that TE does not decide what is tournament content. The tournaments decide what is tournament content. So if TE doesn't have a stage that someone made yesterday and decided to run at their regional tomorrow, TE no longer has all of the tournament content. So I think that's kind of where this disconnect between what is tournament legal and what isn't was coming from people from the PMBR, where everyone was arguing, well, TE is only vanilla PM and therefore is always eligible for tourneys. Well, you're leaving out the tourneys that don't use vanilla PM content. And I know that you've already rectified this in the past because you've added the new stage, the non-vanilla stage Sky Sanctuary Zone, and you've added the fountain. What's the fountain zeal called?
Oh, Sectonia's Gem?
Yeah, that one. So
okay, so a few things on that.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Go, for sure.
Go ahead. I got you.
Okay. So, so first off, we're not claiming to be the arbiters and the sole authorities on what is tournament content and what isn't. However, it's pretty clear that if you're playing Project M 3.6 and the PMDT were really clear about this being the version that's the final version, I think it's safe to assume that as long as you include every PM 3.6 stage in, let's say, TE, there's no margin for error, because there would, like, any scene that's using a non 3.6 stage in their set list, that's on them to get right. That's not on TE. The Z for Sky Sanctuary, there's two things on that. One, that was sort of, Sky Sanctuary never was proposed in any official forum for everyone. It was sort of just a bone we threw to the Australian scene because they've been using it for so long, and we put it as a Z alt specifically. We didn't make it a base stage. We didn't make it a start alt. We didn't try to say that, like, we should be making a ton of, alts for Sky Sanctuary. It was just something that we did for fun. And then to your Sectonia's Gem point, it didn't exist before TE. So it wasn't like we were adding in a stage that people wanted to be a tournament stage that wasn't already one. It was like somebody liked a TE alt that we made and decided it should be used in tournaments. So those things are very different.
So that's the point I'm trying to make, right? If PMBR recommends this stage list, we recommend, hey, we have these modded stages, and someone was saying, okay, cool, but I can't run these modded stages and TE, I need to make my own TE. Why not include modded stages that are popular if they became popular, for example? Why not include, because what I'm saying is you've already drawn this hard line of no, you will not include these mods in future TE builds. But if these mods became popular and they were being run in several regions, specifically non-Australia regions, why not include them in future versions of TE so that people who are running tournaments with these stages, who aren't running tournaments with Sky Sanctuary Zone or the Fountain Z alt, could then run tournaments off of vanilla TE. I'm not saying replace the vanilla stages.
Right, I know what you're saying.
Include these as Z alts.
You're saying, like, have PMBR Delfinos on L and then have the main one on A or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. You've already drawn this hard line of no, you would not include these stages, yes. But I feel like that goes against what you're already doing.
Definitely, I'll explain that. So there's, first off, the Sectonia's Gem is an L alt for Fountain of Dreams, just to be clear. Not that it really matters. I just want to make that clear. The other thing is, no, it's fine. It's all semantics. The let's see. Okay, so there's two main reasons why. One's a philosophical reason, and the second one is a branding reason. So the first reason is, this is the first time that we would have accepted, like, versions of considered by the current meta tourney stages that are, like, slightly different, or versions that are proposed to be the more true versions of the 3.6 versions. Let me see if I can explain this better. So we've never had a alt Delfino secret that wasn't exactly Delfino secret, or we've never had a Wario Land that was sort of like Wario Land, right, and called it Wario Land. So that precedent has never happened in TE before from a philosophical reason, because we don't want to mess with 3.6 stages. And the second reason is the branding reason, which I mentioned earlier, which we'll probably unpack a little bit more later. And it's just plain confusing to have two versions of a stage called Delfino Secret that are different. And obviously in PM 3.5 and 3.0, as the game was being developed, that was perfectly fine because you just went off the latest version. But now that we're on one version, 3.6, it makes very little sense to make a new stage. Let's be clear here. The new Delfinos, the new Dreamland, the new Wario Land, and the new Metal Cavern are new stages. They are brand new stages. Calling them Wario Land, Delfinos, Dreamland, Metal Cavern is disingenuous and it's confusing to people. So, and I think we'll probably unpack this a little bit more later because I think there's some more discussion to be had here, and I'm sure you'll want to respond to this. But like one thing I suggested is like, hey, there are plenty of 1-for-1 reskins of these stages. Why not make your modifications on that stage and then make that the new stage you want to use? So you're no longer playing on Delfino Secret, for example. There's a Luigi's Mansion stage that was a 1-for-1. You make the tweaks to that Luigi's Mansion stage, and then you release this as Luigi's Mansion. People play on Luigi's Mansion, so it's very, very clear which version of the stage. All right,
so I'm just going to interrupt quickly. So one, I know, Reslived has a response to this. He actually did make a Reddit post regarding these kinds of things, but I'm just going to say, like, once we get through this little line of thought, I want to kind of shift it to some other stuff. So you go ahead now. You explain, because I know you and the PMBR have come up with something.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'll be quick with the response. Well, first of all, we did actually discuss this within the PMBR. We had our votes, and we decided that because the stages were already pretty well received in the competitive community in the way they were, we would just change them and then give them their new names, which we added 2E to a lot of them. Right, so a lot of these are now Metal Cavern 2E is the actual name of these stages, and you can ask someone, you can go up to someone and say, hey, does this have the new 2E stages? 2E standing for second edition. Right, so we wanted to make sure that we did distinguish them, and we have added graphical changes to make sure you can notice immediately in case you're in a tournament setting. The other thing is, as far as your branding reason, where you're talking about potentially using a 1-to-1 and then modifying it that way using a new skin as well, is we didn't really want to be in the business of making new stages, which at that point you're essentially doing. If you're taking a stage, changing everything about it and then reskinning it, you are just making a new one. And so we were...
Isn't that what you do with Metal Cavern?
So no, because we're trying to modify it, right? And this is coming back to exactly what Legacy has done, where they have actually created new stages, right? So would you argue that Flat Yoshi's or Sky Sanctuary Zone or I'm going to forget that Cave Gem stage every time.
Sanctonius Gem?
These are actually new stages. So why are you trying to draw the difference of saying we should have created new stages when we just wanted to slightly adjust the stages that were already fairly popular and maintain them at a competitive viability level?
Because every single stage that we've added to TE that's not 3.6 from a gameplay perspective, we have never pushed to be used at tournaments. They were all branded as for fun stages.
And I will continue to disagree that and you're going to say it's from a purely numbers perspective, but I will continue to disagree that, especially at a tournament level, that these don't adjust the actual gameplay. But I'll
and that's okay. Let's hold on. Let's assume for a second that every 1-for-1, every start alt, for example, is just gameplay changing from a perception perspective, so they're never okay to use in tournament. And we say that's totally fine. Play on the base stage for the actual tournament, but then for friendlies, feel free to play on whatever 1-for-1 you want, etc. And in fact, we set up TE in such a way that you can actually load vanilla PM 3.6 and you can gentleman to it if you don't want to play on TE at all. And we specifically set it up for that because we knew that, we were familiar with that experience where someone goes to a scene or whatever and says, oh, I can't play on this alt, it's confusing, or it's not what I'm used to. We literally built TE for that. So you can switch with the same SD card. You can switch from TE to PM on the fly. So yeah, I don't want to keep going. So I'll let you respond, and then I'll shut up so that Tempest can move on.
We would be okay with that, right? Because what we created was a competitive rule set that we are recommending. We are not recommending how people play friendlies. We are not recommending what build people play on. We are recommending a rule set that people compete on, and these are the stages that they've come to compete on, and we've adjusted them in ways that they can recognize.
All right.
Anyway, I think that's a good place to leave it.
I think you guys unpacked a lot of information and definitely showcased the different ideologies between like the PMBR and what they decided on, and kind of what Legacy TE is all about. But so this is something that has been one of our community leaders here in Ontario has been very vocal about. How, if this is to unify, if everyone is to get under this new recommended rule set, how do we reach the little guys? How do we get to the small scenes with like 5 people, the guys who play with their friends from middle school in their basement, right? Like, so are you going to do what the leak fixes did? Are you going to override Project MBR so that you can like download it?
Well, is this a question for me?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's for you to start off, but I also want to hear what David thinks could be done as well. But I think I know the PMBR obviously is going to discuss those kind of things, so I kind of want to hear a bit about of like how did you decide that if the goal is achieved and everyone is unified, how will we make sure that everyone possibly can hear about it other than just like getting it onto all the social medias? Just like, yeah, so just kind of get into that.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I'm not sure how little guy you mean. I live in kind of rural Virginia, and I have some local friends out here who still have a Wii with 3.0 and play on an HD monitor, right? Like you're never going to reach the whole world, but we tried to do our due diligence and talk to as many people as we could that had influence in their scenes. We talked to the guys behind Project Mirror to see if they would have a version of our build included on their download site. We actually did originally reach out to David Kimball and asked, or David V. Kimball, and asked, hey, is there a version of Legacy that could include our stages? So we tried to do our due diligence and in reaching out to as many people as possible, and also get the word out on social media through Reddit, through Facebook. But again, this rule set is specifically for competitive viability, right? We're not creating a brand new build. So if a competitive rule set is being run at tournaments, then tournament attendees will want to play on that build. And that was the biggest motivator for me to ask the Smash and Splash TOs to run this stage list. I wanted them to say, we are running the stage list, download the build here, start getting practice, see what you think.
Now what?
So yeah, I'd like to weigh in now about like, say the PMBR, let's say that like I was totally cool with all the changes, and like I think this is just as valuable as the memory leak fixes, for example, and let's push it out as many places as we could. I think they made the right steps in terms of reaching out to me, reaching out to the Project M Mirror people, and getting feedback, and but I think there were a few misses. The first off is it's not anyone's fault really. This just kind of happened. When Lunchables initially reached out to me, like a long time ago about this, there was just some miscommunication about like, he was looking for approval from me when we talked, and I wasn't quite sure what he was asking. So there's just some misses there. And then I would have liked to be included on the PMBR, and I didn't know, I didn't ever think that PMBR, because I was familiar with the concept of the back room, as what was Reslived said earlier about, obviously there's some kind of group that determines, the tier list and all that. I didn't know they would ever make stage change prepositions, so I never even thought to get myself involved. But if I had known it would have come to that, I would have absolutely wanted to be involved. So I think that's a big thing too. I would have liked to be involved. But let's say again, let's just assume for all intents and purposes that this should be pushed out. I think Legacy T adopting it is really vital, just because so many people use it. I think Project M Mirror having it on there is really, really vital. And then obviously it being very easy to access on the Reddit, on Twitter, on wherever you can. Obviously I have my own reservations about why we shouldn't do that, but I think that would be my plan of attack.
All right. So what you're saying is you are willing to basically help with this distribution. I think, so for me, just to kind of give my own opinion, I know there's communities. So this past year, I found out about a community which is basically I can't remember if it's 12 or 20 hours north of the border. It's way up in Quebec. It's on a.
Is this the Cree?
Yeah, it's a. They have their own little scene there. So it's kind of when I say the little guy, it's kind of scenes like that, but it's also those guys. They want to come out to their first tournament, and you want to make sure that they've heard of these changes, right? Because maybe they started practicing at home. It's you want them to. Be able to always hear about this new recommended rule set, right? Because I know I've had issues with, say, the tier list where I'm I can't find this tier list. Where is it? I can't figure out where it is. It's kind of you want to make sure that you can find where do I download this new recommended rule set? I want to try this out because my local scene I just found out it exists is running it. I want to just kind of you just basically you don't want them to not know that the thing they maybe downloaded off Project M Mirror is different. But you did say that you reached out to Project M Mirror and that you reached out to David, but obviously he mentioned there was some miscommunications. So personally, I think you guys did cover a lot of your bases, and I mean, I also heard about it before it dropped too. Like, I think it was Saber messaged me to ask about if I was part of the Frozen Phoenix TO staff, which I am. So we brought it up with kind of Canada's, like, I don't know, our back room, I guess. And I don't know, you guys definitely did a really good job of communicating to the community leaders. I think it's just the PMBR is going to have to figure out a way to keep it in a place that is accessible, both by like search, but also by download and just kind of like the spread of information. Like, I just think the spread of information is going to be the hardest part. And the PMBR has done their best to tackle, but they'll kind of have to stay on their game with it if they want to go forward with it.
So I agree with that, and I don't think we're doing necessarily a bad job. I think we are reaching out to as many. But as a kind of comparison, I wanted to ask everyone in here: if you played Brawl, did you think Meta Knight was banned?
Well, for me, I didn't, because I didn't know anything. I just kind of played.
Same.
Well, as a young loser who was getting into Brawl a few years ago, if you Google like Brawl and Meta Knight, you would think Meta Knight was banned. So it's one of those things that for a long time, it's more about who's loudest and where you're looking. And the PMBR, we recognized this when we realized, okay, we have to create a new build. Like people are going to have to download this. They're going to have to update their Wii's. They're going to have to, make changes for their tournaments. They're going to have to do this. They're going to have to do that. So that's why we reached out to as many people as we did. We really wanted people to know, hey, brace yourselves. We would like to recommend some changes for competitive viability.
So, and I want to respond to that because I'm going to make one argument in favor of your position and then one against, and then one that's just kind of a question. And one thing I would say is, this community is not necessarily a stranger to downloading content and putting it on their SD card. They have to do it in the first place to get PM to work at all. So, from a barrier perspective, you could argue that they're relatively used to the process, so it might not be a big deal. On the other hand, we're talking, if you play PM 3.6, if you play PM 3.6 with memory leak fixes, or if you play TE, you're fundamentally playing the same game. So people could spend hours with any of those builds and play all the stages and be woefully prepared for any tournament ever. And that changes starting with any kind of changes such as these PMBR stage list changes. Now all of a sudden, they could have been spending, years on their PM 3.6 build, and not all that. Some of it gets thrown out the window because they don't have the time to practice on the actual stages that are used at tournaments, and I think that's problematic.
Can I make a quick response to that?
Yeah, sure. It's
the fact that's not exactly true. It's the fact that there are tournaments out there who are running non-vanilla stages, and that it's even happening at majors. We saw it at Don't Sleep, where they were running a modded version of Yoshi's Island. So it's not necessarily the PMBR that's ruining the potential potential learnings from new people who are playing on these older builds and then going to tournaments and finding that their builds don't work. It's not the PMBR's fault for that, because it's the original tournament organizers.
What you're saying is totally right, and that brings me actually to the main point I wanted to make, and that's the question becomes like, and I bring this up all the time, is like, who's the authority to make these stage changes? And kind of the running rule is, it's kind of up to the TO, it's up to the TO or whatever. And I guess I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but I guess I'm here to challenge that a little bit. Like, to what degree should TOs be able to like just do that? And I guess, they do. It's all community run, so I guess they do have the right for that. But one thing that you said earlier, Reslived, is that, people, picking different stage lists and, not agreeing on Paragon revealed a fundamental flaw with the stages. And I want to say that's the opposite. I want to say the fact that people are able to change the stage list and pick different ones means that there's a lot of good options in PM, especially compared to Melee, for example. It's like, if we were to give a PMBR treatment to Melee, one of the things that I can think of is freeze PS1 and make that the standard. And the fact of the matter is, Melee modding is possible. 20XX TE has a feature where you can freeze Pokemon Stadium, but that's still not the standard, and there's a reason for that. And I think that reason holds true. The only reason why it's perceived differently in PM is because it's such an easy thing to mod, and it was in constant open development for 11 years, or not 11 years, for 6 years or whatever.
Can I give a hard disagree?
I think there's a really important distinction to make there between like the nature of the game that is easily modded, and then two, of course, there are other games that could benefit from these kinds of fixes that are all in the spirit of wanting to make it more competitively viable, but that doesn't necessarily make it the right move from a meta perspective, from a confusion perspective, and some of the points that we were talking about
So
earlier.
I have a hard disagree and a hard example for you. Which of the Smash games do you think is the hardest Smash game to mod?
Oh, I'm not here to argue about like difficulty of modding.
The point is it was going to be Smash 64. Right? And the reason I brought up that Smash 64 is insanely difficult to mod is because they run modded Smash 64 at all Smash 64 tournaments. Genesis is run with modded 64. They ran doubles just this past year with stages that are not unlockable in the base game. They run with Final Destination. They run with Battlefield. Those stages don't exist in 64 without mods. On top of that, they add an 8-minute timer to Smash 64, which also doesn't exist in Smash 64, and it's not even that it can't be unlocked, it just actually doesn't exist. They've added voice clips that go 3, 2, 1 time because they knew that they needed competitive viability to be modded into their game because they didn't want Super Boom Fan playing another 52-minute game on Hyrule Temple, right? So the point is, yes, it sucks that TOs are able to make the decision, but at the end of the day, money talks, right? And you're attending these tournaments, and they're the ones that get to make the decisions. And there is precedent for modding a game in order to make it more competitively viable so that more people attend your tournaments.
I think that's a very fair point, and one I hadn't considered. But I just think, like, I still want to push back on your point that, there's a fundamental problem with the Project M stage list, assuming we're talking about the Paragon one. So I think 64 was another unique situation where, what is it? And I'm not totally familiar with the 64 scene, so feel free to educate me. But isn't it true that Dreamland's the only stage you can play on, assuming it's not modded?
So Dreamland is the only legal stage in singles.
Right. Okay. So I think that is a valid point. I'm not going to discredit it, but I still think it's in a sort of different category because the other thing about PM is that what's unique about PM is that the PMDT had a unique relationship with its player base that none of the other games did. And so I also want to call that out. And PMDT were super, super clear about 3.6 being the final version. Of course, they were aware people were able to mod the game, but because of that unique relationship and because of their authority on this mod specifically, I think it's definitely worth noting that pretty much every single PMDT person I've talked to is fundamentally against it. And so I think that's definitely worth something because I would consider them the authority on like the changes. And the only person that I'm aware of on the PMDT that's in favor of it is Lunchables, who is of course on the PMBR. And even he wasn't a fan of how the stages rolled out. And he was in favor of like the reskin idea that would rebrand them and stuff. And so, so I just want to call that out too, because I think that's worth mentioning.
And I also want to call out that you've talked to a lot of PMDT members, and so have I, right? There are a lot of former PMDT members, and I'm sure you've talked to a bunch who are opposed to the changes, and I've talked to some who are in favor of the changes. So, it's the PMDT is also a group of people. There's not one person in that group that can really have the authority that I think all of us so desperately want for this community to have.
Well, I mean, I think there's some leaders, for example, folks in the council or whatever, that I would say hold a little bit more sway than the rest of the group. I don't know if that's fair or not. That's just kind of how I feel about it. And a lot of them are very, very against it, which I would consider, the people's opinions that matter arguably more than some of the others.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so what I think, just kind of listening to this. So, one, I do see the kind of both sides of this. I've seen the vocal members who are against it, and I've seen the vocal members who are for it. But I also have I think I agree with both of you in the sense of that, like, the good thing about PM is that there is a bunch of stages in vanilla. That's why people can't agree on it. But I also agree with the PMBR in that it is a negative because you don't want people, like, there's people who have to move for school. We have a younger scene in PM. That's why, like, some people, they move around from like Washington to Arizona and stuff like that. So I think it is good to have some sense of like uniformity in terms of the stage list that's being run. And I agree with the PMBR in terms of their recommended rule set in that their goal is to have everyone kind of be the same. Like they don't want you coming over to Canada for Frozen Phoenix playing on the Paragon stage list, and then you go.
Can I respond to that? Like really quick.
What was that?
I want to be really clear. I'm all for that standardization. Also, just to be clear, I want it to be for Paragon. I think Paragon's the right move,
No, so I think
my quick response to that is we've had Paragon for so long, and it doesn't look like standardization is sticking.
Yeah, so that was kind of what I was about to mention as well. So I think the PMBR came to the conclusion that, you know what, Paragon was what we thought was going to be the standard, and several regions kind of said, nope, we're not going to run Paragon 9. And the regions like New York were like, nope, we're not going to do character first. And I don't know, there's all sorts of things. Like Australia's doing their Sky Sanctuary Zone. Lots of regions still run like Bowser's probably. And Reslived mentioned MDVA hated Delfino's Secret. So I think it was a valid line of thought to go, you know what, maybe the problem is in the stages themselves. Maybe not that there's too many. Maybe it's just that the ones that exist aren't facilitating a rule set that people all want to play under. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true. So for me, I'm still stuck on the fence because I obviously, like all of us, want a unified rule set. The only problem is no one can seem to agree on what that should be. But I think, like we mentioned earlier, TOs are the ones who ultimately have the power, and I think TOs need to stop being selfish, I guess. Like, I think a good example in Melee is Juggle Guy had wobbling banned for how long? And it was like, okay, well, we've unbanned wobbling almost everywhere. We need to stop basically having, especially because the Big House is such a big tournament. It's like, we can't have this one scene that's not doing what everyone else is doing. We need to have some kind of standard. And now we see them running into it again with UCF. They don't know if they should run it or not. Nintendo sponsoring things. What do we do? Right? I think PM is in this situation where I think the PMBR made the right call in that they need to try and unify it again, but maybe like they missed a little on what they decided to do with it. But I think at this point, right, we've come to the point where they have released what they've released, and there's a daunting task ahead of the PM community where we have to somehow get this all. We just have to get everyone on board, right? And it's going to be really hard. I think the PMBR has been doing their best to kind of salvage the backlash and kind of the weird way that it came about. I know like Ripple did that thing where he just, I don't even know where he posted. He posted PM community or PM hell or something. He's just like, okay, so now that blah, 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 blah is happening. And everyone was like, what's going on? I literally didn't know that until you said that. And like Reslived mentioned, they haven't even made an official statement. Like, this is kind of the problem, is things, one, maybe not everyone agrees with the call, but two, the information kind of disseminated really weird. And now it's kind of this whole, okay, we have to fix that, and now we have to pursue this like recommended rule set. And the thing is, it is recommended, right? So you have to also think,
yeah,
I don't know, it's difficult.
So my thoughts just on what you just said as a PMBR admin, and this isn't an argument or anything. If you've seen all this talk about the recommended rule set, please just try out the build.
I think
right?
That's fair.
Because if everyone tries it out and says, hey, this is garbage, we might actually make steps towards unifying under Paragon, right? So I'd like to see at least people give it a try, run one or two locals maybe, and just see if they like it or not.
I think,
and then we
ultimately
can
the PMBR, like I'm definitely throwing my own voice into the PMBR here, but I think that ultimately the PMBR wants people to talk more about why this problem has occurred in the scene. Why, if you guys all try our rule set and you all come up with different problems, the PMBR wants to know them so they can go back to the drawing board basically and figure out how the heck to get everyone happy. Because we want the scene to grow, but if we keep fragmenting which rule set everyone's running, it becomes this really weird jigsaw puzzle of like, oh, this region does this and this region does this, and if this region is the one running the major, I have to learn that rule set because I live on the opposite side of the country, or I don't even live in that country, blah, 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 blah. I think the PMBR got it right when they basically said, we want input, but you need to all give us input about the same thing.
Definitely. I would say too, like, and I have a question, Reslived, actually. You mentioned earlier that, like, if there was enough, like, blowback and, like, people weren't super satisfied with it, you consider Paragon. So, like, let's say, I know we'd never have hard numbers like this, but let's say, for example, a good 50% were for and 50% were against. Would you kind of have, like, a final vote from PMBR to make it, or how would you make that decision?
I wasn't saying that the PMBR would start recommending Paragon. What I meant more was along the lines of, hey, if people try out modded stages and say, hey, this is garbage, I prefer vanilla stages, we as a community would start making steps towards making sure everyone plays on Paragon more often than not, right? Because the big problem right now is everyone is kind of sick of Paragon and running whatever stage list they want in all these different regions, right? It's the equivalent of saying, hey, Melee players, what if we brought back Mute City? Everyone plays Mute City for 2 weeks and goes, oh yeah, that's why we don't play on Mute City. Right? If that kind of thing were to happen, that would actually be more of a unifying force. So that's why I'm trying to suggest, people try out the build. Now, if we get to a situation where 50% are for, 50% are against, then we're just kind of back where we started, which is TOs kind of run whatever they want.
I think if it got to that,
I guess my point is, like...
Sorry, yeah, I think if it gets to the point where it's 50-50, I think that means the conversation is just not done yet. I think that means that there's not enough people either talking amongst themselves from each point of view, or that just not enough people have been able to formulate their opinion. I think when you have, like the PMBR did this, right? If you had a 10 versus 10 vote, that means you're not done. It means you gotta talk it out more, you gotta flesh it out more, maybe, you gotta maybe bring up some more facts that people haven't considered. I think if the scene came to that same conclusion, it means that we need more information. And I think that's kind of the goal of this, right? Is PMBR is trying to get information. They want to know what's going on. Why can't people agree? And this is what they recommend to see. Maybe we can figure it out with this. Maybe if we all run character first for a few months at a few majors or whatever, we can figure out maybe why people like stage first better. Maybe it's just because they play low tiers and they want to be able to pull out their Ganon. I don't know, but we need some way to put all the input towards the same thing, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely all for that. I just think, today it's these four stages that are being suggested. Tomorrow it could be something else, as far as I'm concerned. Because honestly, I'm going to repeat this, I understand the effort and the amount of energy that was poured into making these decisions, but to be honest, this is the fourth recommended set of changes from 3.6 since the PMDT shutdown. And that to be said, I'm going to give this one more benefit because there's a collective, there was actually an organized effort. These are actual leaders in the community. But I will say, I had these same conversations about using 3.61 when literally, regions were using it. And it wasn't those undisciplined scenes are just going to be boys will be boys kind of thing. It's no, you need to go back to 3.6 like everyone else to be legit. And we fought through that, and that happened. That happened with PMCC, and it happened with a bunch of other community-led changes. And it's because the game is so easily modded, and because there's this appetite to fix flaws and to have new stuff, it's kind of the two things that I bring up that people like. I think this will be a continual struggle. I don't think this will be the last time, despite these really careful discussions. I don't think this will be the last time that changes to core PM are going to be suggested. So with that in mind, it's the PMDT made it really clear what we wanted. I think it's worth respecting their wishes. I think the stage list as it is brilliant and has tons of options compared to other Smash games out there. Let's say that aren't modded, for example. And then lastly, I just think it makes a more cohesive community, and the meta can stay where it has been for the last 3 years. And I think there's a lot of value.
So my question for you then is this, because we've mentioned that, you mentioned weeding out the 3.61 scenes, because, if you want to be legit, you have to play 3.6, and it's kind of it needs to be worthy.
I want to jump in real quick and say, I believe there were only 3 3.61 scenes after that happened, and one of them still exists.
That's fair.
Yeah, Brazil still runs
3.61. And the other one that's coming to my mind is Pittsburgh, and I think there was one more that sprung up.
Didn't Philly do it or something? I don't know. I've just seen Chibo.
No, I don't think so.
A million times.
And I would say that's a problem.
My question basically is, because we've seen multiple times where we've tried to unify under a stage list not go well, is it still, do you think this time around, like it's out now, right? Like the PMBR has released this recommended rule set, they've released the stages. Is it, do you think we
Not
should
fully,
pursue
by the way.
it? Pardon me?
Not fully, by the way.
Right, yeah. They have not released an
testing.
official statement. It's just the information has spread like a wildfire. But
Yeah.
do you think, David, that this time should be the last time? Like, should we pursue it as the last time, or are you still skeptical because of the changes to the stages?
I suppose I'm up for conversations all the time, for one thing. I think they're vital. But in terms of finding a standardized rule set, I don't mind. I'd rather everyone be on one, let's say. That would be my ideal world. But let's assume that we can't get everyone onto Paragon and then the kind of common rule set that exists. I would be okay with any recommendation, like any stages, any, whatever, that exist within PM 3.6. If it was content in 3.6 that was accessible, that you could play, that is all on the table. That is all fair game, as far as I'm concerned. Where I start having issues is that if we're trying to standardize something that was not in 3.6 to begin with in the first place, I think that's inherently problematic for the reasons I've listed before.
So do we, but obviously the best part about this entire debacle is that we are all talking about stage lists and rule sets now, which is definitely one of the main things the PMBR wanted, right? We want to talk about these rule sets, these stage lists, these changes that need to be made to the scene as a whole. Do you think maybe that even if it's not this rule set, because like Reslived said, maybe we end up going to Paragon, this is the thing we need to ride into some kind of maybe TO summit to get everyone on board to this, a unified rule set that maybe doesn't, like this one that's been proposed, or does exist within PM 3.6?
Absolutely. I think the fact that the PMBR took it upon themselves to get the conversation going is huge. I think it's great. One thing I'll say that's interesting is after TE 1.0, a lot of feedback we got is, I love the start alts, I love these cool skins and stuff, but there's a lot of like reskins I never play on. Like I never play on the Metal Cavern reskin, or I never play on the Norfair reskin. I never play on, XYZ. I never play on the Yoshi's Story Brawl reskin, or Yoshi's Island Brawl, I should say. I wish there were more stages like that are relevant to the meta, and like Paragon ones. And so TE 1.0 is very much an experiment of, to what degree do people like, because we know that people stuff their builds with custom content, and we were a little bit concerned that, because of some of the reasons we all talked about earlier, if you're replacing vanilla PM content and someone says, I can't play on this, and you have no alt stage that's truly vanilla, that's a problem, right? Like, that player is dissatisfied, or someone's going to think it's unfair, or yada, yada, yada. So that goes back to the whole philosophy of TE, which is PM 3.6 untouched plus other things. Like, that's how you can think of TE, right? And so anything that disrupts that is problematic, I think. So anyway, all that to say, for 2.0, if you notice, I want to say every Paragon starter has 5 start alts, and every not starter, but
counterpick,
thank you, has, I believe, 4 start alts. And so we very, very deliberately aligned TE 2.0 to be around Paragon. Then we also added, because there's one man odd out in this, how the stages work, we had a start out for Bowser's Castle, because it's kind of in that weird in-between stage. So we very much like have been testing the waters and like been listening to feedback. And so based on all that feedback, it's like, I kind of wish in an ideal world, PMBR and TE would have teamed up to get more concrete feedback on what the stage list should be in, because the start alts actually solve the new content problem for a lot of people. Because like some people just like new stuff, right? It doesn't solve the I see flaws in 3.6 problem, but it does solve the new stuff problem, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I just want to hear from Reslived, and then I think we're going to start winding it down, because this is definitely getting a bit long, but it's good stuff at least. So yeah, Reslived, you take over, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from there.
I thought you were going to ask me a question.
No, if you have a response, go ahead. If not, I have a few things left, just a few little things, and then we're good to...
I don't have a specific response. I feel like everyone's kind of made the points they're going to make today.
Right.
My final ask, and I'm going to repeat this to the day I die, is please just try the stages. I've heard from so many people who are saying, I'm just going to wait and see if the stages catch on. Well, then no one's going to play the stages.
Please don't do that.
If you try the stages, if you think they're good, then hopefully they'll work for your competitive tournament. If you try the stages and you say, no, I was already against mods and this only makes me hate them more, then that's fine too. We love hearing that kind of feedback.
But please let them hear it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I have totally played this build. Like, I took a whole day and I just played the heck out of it. And by the way, you guys use the Brawl Stage Manager. Don't use it because it breaks my music. Yeah, that's a side point.
We just wanted to hurt you that much. No.
I did. It hurt my soul. No, actually, though, I actually was really happy with the build for the most part. You guys are really clever and inventive about how you you included TE alts, which really flattered our team. Other than the problems we have with it, obviously, it was actually a really cool build to play. And the TE team has been really looking at it and playing it. And I know some of our playtesters have been really extensively playing it because, for example, some of them are going to be at Smash and Splash, so it behooved them to do it anyway. So we're not just talking the talk. We actually really try to engage with these stages and stuff.
So
I just want to give my thoughts just before we wrap up here, just because I haven't talked at all about this. But
you've been a great listener, Moto.
My plan worked.
It's been very entertaining, but basically. Just for the stages themselves, I actually really like the stage list. I like not dying at 20 on Wireland. I like being able to kill off the top on Dreamland. And Metal Cavern's actually really fun. I like that stage a lot. I think no matter how much we try to make one unified standard that everyone uses, I don't think that everyone will go under one standard every single scene. I don't think that'll ever happen. Especially with modded stages that aren't in the vanilla game. I don't think that'll ever happen. But I really like how the PMBR is going about this, contacting pretty much almost everyone that is relevant in the community and has power and runs their scenes and stuff. I think they've done a really good job on that. And I don't think Smash and Splash was a tournament to premiere it at. I think it was a little bit too close. I know Pooch really wanted to because it's his tournament and he is really passionate about the stage list. I think revealing it when it was revealed, but having it premiere at Low Tier City was probably a better idea. But that's something that we can't really control at this point. I'm excited to try it out at Smash Splash. I have it on the Sonic Round Robin build already because it's why not? And I think it'll be good, but we'll see how everything goes down.
I think the biggest takeaway from what we've discussed is basically don't let this conversation we've had on the podcast, for those listening, end here. We want you to keep talking about these things. The PMBR wants to hear all the feedback possible. Like Reslived said, if it sucks, don't just pout about it. Please tell them. They want to know what's going on. That's the whole point of this thing, is to get this discussion going and get us in the right direction towards a unified rule set. So,
yeah. I think even though the arguments on Reddit have sometimes been seen as a bad thing, or the Twitter drama has been seen as a bad thing, it's really kind of a good thing because it's getting people talking.
And on that note, I want to give a quick shout out to David because all of my interactions with him online have been generally civil discourse, which I don't think either of us have had with everyone we've talked to about this issue.
Yeah, dude, I want to extend that same thanks to you because I was seriously I knew this podcast was coming, and when I heard that it was Reslived going to be the person, I was like, thank God. Oh my goodness.
You are the first person to ever be happy to see me in the Project M community. Let me just throw that out there.
Oh.
The only one.
Are we going to cut that out? Because that's made me sad.
I mean, I can stick up for Canada.
No, I completely agree. I'm glad you think so. I've really tried to be civil about this, and obviously lots of people feel very strongly, so that's also a good thing to come out of it, is people were obviously able to come out and demonstrate why they feel so strongly about something. And obviously, I mean, I think on both sides people could have worded things a little better. But kind of what Tempest was saying, I think it was fun to see the people come out and explain why they feel so strongly one way or the other.
So I mean, just to kind of finish it, put a little pretty bow on it, I think you guys did a very good job, like you said, of being civil towards each other. You made mine and Moto's job really easy. I had a lot of questions prepared in case things didn't get brought up, and you guys hit every point and more. So I'm very thankful for you guys for knowing your stuff.
Yeah, we got fucking carried.
Yeah, you guys did fantastic. So thank you for that. Thank you for almost facilitating the discussion by yourself. I was just kind of being a mediator.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about it. I don't have much else to add. I think we've kind of run this topic as far as we can in our current state. I don't know. Anything else to add? Either of you?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this. I've actually wanted to be on the Nexuscast for a very long time. And so it's really fun to like be able to do that. So I just want to thank you guys. And also, Reslived, thank you for being a good debater on this, because I've been on podcasts before where like stuff gets kind of awkward. This was a great podcast. This was a great show. So thanks for being a good participant.
It was fun talking. Thanks to Nexuscast for having us on, obviously. And I don't know who I'm going to see at Smash and Splash, but I'll be there. I'll probably be at Even Bigger Balk. I'll probably be at Low Tier City. I travel a lot, so hopefully I'll see you guys and whoever's listening in person, and we can talk about it more there.
Yeah, but thanks for listening, everybody. Just to wrap it up, David, Reslived, just let everyone know where they can find you too, maybe on Twitter or something like that. Just kind of plug your social medias. Reslived, go first.
So I'm on Twitter at Reslived. I'm on YouTube as Reslived. You can find me on Discord killing Project M for good as Reslived. Yeah, if you want to find me, it's just Reslived. I'm probably going to be commentating at Smash and Splash. I haven't actually heard yet. I travel to just about everything, so come say hi. I love talking to PM players.
And you can find me on Twitter at David V. Kimball. In fact, think of a website that exists, put a / and a David V. Kimball, and it's probably mine. It's kind of creepy and it's kind of odd, but that's okay.
Everywhere.
It's kind of my shtick. And also, obviously, you can hang out at the Legacy Discord at discord.gg/legacy and talk about TE and thoughts you have around it, and lots of stuff going on with like new content. So head over there. Although I'm on vacation for the next week because I really needed it. So if you try to contact me within the next week, I might not respond. But other than that, you should totally hang out, and it'd be fun to like hear about your PM experience and stuff. Awesome.
All right, Moto, you want to wrap it up for us?
You can follow me on Twitter at Motobug _ But yeah, that's been our show. I know I didn't say much, but Tempest definitely been doing a good job being our new host. Well, one of our new hosts. But it's been great. Thank you guys for coming on, being civil, not destroying the world. And we'll see you guys next time.
All right, see you guys.